This podcast contains adult themes and may be disturbing to some listeners. Discretion is advised.
Welcome to Class A Felons, B Films, C Cups. I'm your hostess, Paris. Today's episode is titled Caril Fugate, Bad Love in the Badlands. And I'd like to dedicate this episode to an already loyal listener, Dave Nelms. Dave was kind enough to give us a great review on iTunes, and we so appreciate it. Give Dave a follow on Instagram at Tiki Chippy. That's Tiki_Chippy, Chippy. He posts all manner of really cool photos about everything tiki, as his handle suggests, as well as adorable photos of his doggy, whose name is Hubble. Thank you, Dave, for the feedback, love. Let's go ahead and get into the story. In December of 1957 and January 1958, 19-year-old Charles Starkweather of Nebraska murdered 11 people. His 14-year-old girlfriend, Caril Fugate, is believed to have been present for all but one of those killings, and her mother, stepfather, and toddler sister were among the victims. The teens were apparently fueled by their desire to be together without restrictions or interference. Their stories inspired numerous films, including 1973's Badlands with Martin Sheen and Sissy Spacek, 1993's California, and 1994's Natural Born Killers, as well as literature and songs, including Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska. The area around Lincoln, Nebraska, in the southeast corner of the state, consisted of modest living, hardworking people. In the late 1950s, the middle-class city of Lincoln was quickly being modernized, while smaller surrounding farming towns remained economically stagnant. Teenage culture was booming, as it was all over the U.S., and Elvis Presley was a major obsession. Caught right in the middle of the Midwest, residents of this area were used to climate problems. Floods and tornadoes were expected entities to deal with. In early 1958, the locals had to deal with an unexpected and even more frightening entity, spree killer Charles Starkweather, who was on the loose with his girlfriend Caril. Let's start with Caril's backstory. Caril Ann Fugate was born July 30th, 1943, and grew up in a low-rent or, quote, slummy area of Lincoln, Nebraska. She had one older sibling named Barbara. Caril's family were not churchgoers, but a member of the Lincoln Church of the Nazarene regularly dropped by to drive the young Caril to services. And here you see the Nazarene Church has a way of popping up unexpectedly into our podcast, as it did in the Manson Women Episode 1 podcast, with its reference to Charles Manson's early years in the Nazarene Church, and my own as well. Caril's father drank heavily, which caused marital problems. One Sunday around this time, Caril's mother, Velda, put a note on the front door which announced that the girls would no longer be attending church. She was apparently worried that word of the difficulties at home would get around. Velda divorced Caril's father in 1951 and married a man named Marion Bartlett, who was 22 years her senior. Caril's birth father, who also remarried, has been called an alcoholic and a, quote, jailbird, who was arrested at least twice for sex-related charges. When Caril was 11, her mother had another baby, named Betty Jean. In January 1958, when our story takes place, Marion Bartlett was 57, Velda was 36, and Betty was just 2 years old. Caril, a blue-eyed brunette, was 14, although some thought she looked about 18. She stood 5 feet 1 inch tall and 105 pounds. Caril liked to sew and to skate, but she'd never even owned a bicycle. She earned pocket money by babysitting the neighbors' children. The Bartlett home was a run-down, 5-room structure with an outhouse in the back. So even in the modern era of the 1950s, they did not have indoor plumbing. Caril's stepfather was known as a stern, hard-working man, but there has never been any rumors of abuse or real unhappiness in the household. Caril was dating Charles, aka Charlie, aka Chuck Starkweather, a red-haired 19-year-old who wore glasses and was just 5 feet 5 inches tall. His idol, according to his sister, was James Dean, the equally hot-headed star of the 1955 film Rebel Without a Cause. He tried to imitate the way Dean stood, with a cigarette dangling from his mouth. He fancied himself a hot rodder. He loved cars, and he also loved participating in demolition derbies, often winning money for being the most skilled daredevil. For a few months, he tried associating himself with a hot rod club called the Drifters, but the group quickly disbanded when they couldn't figure out what the club was supposed to actually do. Like Caril's family, the Starkweathers lived in poverty, and Charlie was always self-conscious about having to wear second-hand clothing purchased from thrift shops. He complained that wearing castaway clothing was, quote, like wearing the skin of a dead man. He most often wore jeans and a black leather jacket, which I don't think would have really stood out on a 1950s teenager. Speaking of dead men, Charlie obsessed over his own death and planned to die young. He anthropomorphized death, viewing it as a person, and more specifically, a woman. He referred to death as she, unconsciously revealing his ambivalent feelings toward women in general. He quit school at 16 and worked first as a trash collector and then at a newspaper warehouse. But his temper and perpetual self-pity kept him from keeping jobs for any real length of time. He had few friends. In high school, he struck up a rare friendship with a boy named Bob von Busch. They cruised together, drank beer, and occasionally stole cars for joyriding or for stripping down. Bob began dating a young woman named Caril Fugate, which Charlie resented. But in 1956, Bob introduced Charlie to Barb's younger sister, Caril. Just 13 at the time, her attitude and style made her appear at least 5 years older. She still wore ponytails in her hair, but she juxtaposed them with jeans and men's shirts with the sleeves rolled up. She was known for being rebellious and quick-tempered like Charlie. She also cursed without a second thought and already knew how to drive. Like Charlie, she had been held back a grade in elementary school, although according to her grandmother, her ambition was to become a nurse. She had never traveled outside of Nebraska and was uneducated and out of touch about current events. For instance, she had no idea that the U.S. had been involved in the Korean War only a few years prior, or even that there was a war. She didn't know the name of Harry Truman, the previous president before Eisenhower. But Caril did know that she liked Charlie's rebel persona. She found what he called his bow legs and black moods attractive. When a neighborhood friend asked Caril what she saw in Charlie, Caril responded, "Well, he thinks I'm great." Also, despite the fact that he didn't work steadily, he used what money he had to buy her gifts, like a record player, a radio, and a gold heart-shaped pendant with the word Caril engraved on one side and Chuck on the other. He regularly took her out to watch movies at the drive-in and to his beloved demolition derbies. He even let her drive his Ford, although she got into a traffic collision that was her fault. Charlie's father, Guy, who had taken out a $150 loan to help his son buy the car, was furious and forbade Caril from driving it. But Charlie openly defied his dad, which was unusual for him, because they generally saw eye to eye on everything. Caril's official law enforcement punishment was to write a 500-word essay on the dangers of driving without a license. Charlie was obsessed with Caril, maybe because he saw Lady Death in her as well. He said, "Until I met Caril, I never had the kind of girl a kid gets along with. I had a nice girl once, but she got to upsetting my death deal, and I had to drop her." In other words, the so-called nice girl distracted him too much from his fantasies of death. But now he also fantasized about marrying Caril. He spread a rumor that Caril was pregnant, one which got back to Caril's stepfather. Marion Bartlett was repulsed. He disapproved of Charlie's lack of ambition, his use of slang and profanity, his, quote, sloppy clothing, and his arrogance. Charlie approached Marion twice to discuss the prospect of marrying Caril and was told to forget it. The second time he asked, Marion warned him that if he broached the topic again, Caril would no longer be allowed to see him. This seems to have been the catalyst for Charlie's decision to give in to his fantasies of becoming a rebel outlaw and engaging with his death wish. Although Caril would forever deny she knew anything about any murders until after her own family was killed, Charlie repeatedly makes reference to what Caril and he both decided to do together within jailhouse interviews and journals. But on December 1st, 1957, Charlie was alone when he killed 21-year-old gas station attendant and former Navy serviceman Robert Colvert. Robert's wife was pregnant with their first and only child. He had only been working at the gas station for a week when Charlie came in late one night and tried to buy a teddy bear for Caril on credit from the station's convenience store. Who does that? Who tries to buy a gas station teddy bear on credit? Anyway, he was disgruntled, but left when Robert told him he'd have to pay cash. A week later, Charlie treated Caril to a steakhouse dinner with his latest $20 demolition derby winnings. Then they went to the drive-in to watch a drama called The Enemy Below, starring Robert Mitchum, followed by a Western, their two favorite genres. At 2:30 a.m., long after dropping Caril off at home, Charlie returned to the gas station, robbed it, then kidnapped Robert Colvert. He made him drive several miles to a railroad crossing, where he shot Robert twice and left his body lying in the middle of the road. During the Christmas holiday, Charlie spent his blood money on gifts for Caril, his family, even his landlady, as well as an elderly family friend named August Meyer. Caril and Charlie spent more time together at his place while she was on break from school, listening to records, eating junk food, and practicing knife throwing. But the money went fast, and Charlie was having trouble finding work. He reasoned that employers would be more likely to want to hire a stable married man, so, ignoring Caril's stepfather's decree, he decided to yet again approach him about marrying Caril. Charlie went over to the Bartlett residence on January 20th, 1958, while Caril was at school, and told Marion he wanted to marry his stepdaughter right away. "Why right away?" Marion demanded, the sound of alarm bells in his head overpowering wedding bells. The rumor of Caril's pregnancy was still in the back of his mind, and Caril had been putting on weight, although it was from junk food and not a pregnancy. Marion became even more suspicious when Charlie dodged the question. Responding to Marion's anger, Charlie commented, "Hey, don't go ape." And Marion became even more furious at this, quote, jive talk. He literally threw Charlie out of the house by his collar. Now furious himself, Charlie brooded until the next day, then returned to the Bartlett home. We have only Charlie's account of what happened next, since Caril has denied being there, and, well, everyone else present was permanently silenced that day. Charlie claimed he let himself into the house after being able to hear from outside Caril and her mother yelling at each other. He said that Velda claimed Caril was pregnant and slapped him several times once he entered the house. He slapped her back, and Marion then intervened. He and Charlie began to fight and wrestle, and then, per Charlie's version, Marion went for a claw hammer. That's when Charlie raised the single-shot .22 he'd brought into the house, under the ridiculous precept that he thought Marion might like to go hunting with him after their argument the day before. Marion collapsed in Caril's bedroom, dead from a head wound. Caril, who'd locked herself in the bathroom after arguing with her mother, came out, stared at the body for a moment, and then supposedly followed Charlie into the living room. Charlie then said that Velda came charging out of the kitchen, brandishing a foot-long butcher knife. He shot her as well, and when she didn't immediately fall, hit her with the butt of his gun. Meanwhile, poor little Betty was terrified and screaming. Charlie said that Caril yelled at her to shut up, and he then hit her with a gun. When she continued to scream, he recalled, he threw the kitchen knife at her, hitting her either in the throat or the chest. Then he went back into the bedroom and stabbed Marion. Caril's version of events differs. She claims that she was at school when the murders occurred. When she got home, her family was gone, and Charlie told her they were being held hostage at another location and would be okay if she cooperated with him. She says that she initially didn't believe his story, but was afraid of him, so she did what he asked. Back to Charlie's version. After he was sure Caril's family was dead, he commented, "We sure got ourselves in a hell of a mess," to which he claimed Caril responded, "Well, it's what we always wanted." He then gathered bedding, rags, and rugs in which to wrap the bodies. Poor little Betty was bleeding so badly that he first placed her in the kitchen sink to drain the blood. He then dragged the 3 bodies out into the backyard, with specific hiding places in mind. Returning to the house, he cleaned up, mopping up the blood on the floor. Finally, he sprinkled perfume around on the carpet to try to disguise the smell of blood. This entire time, Caril sat in a rocking chair in the living room and watched TV. Finally, Charlie left and walked to the grocery store, returning 30 minutes later with 3 bottles of Pepsi and a bag of potato chips. Caril did not use this opportunity to leave or to call for help. The pair stayed in the Bartlett residence together for the next 6 days. Caril admits that they lived in a way that suggests they were playing house. They cooked breakfast, fed the pets, played gin rummy, watched TV constantly, and slept together. Caril also read comic books and cut out paper dolls. The 2 killed time, once again, by throwing knives at the walls. When her sister Barb hadn't heard from their mother in a week, she began to worry. Velda had photos of Barb and Bob's newborn baby she'd wanted to drop by. But she hadn't come by or called, which was unlike her. Barb and Bob spent money on a cab to drive with the baby to her mother and stepfather's home. But they had barely exited the taxi when Caril opened the front door and yelled at them to stop. "Mom, Dad, and the baby are sick. You don't want your baby to catch it." Then she added, very ominously, "Go away if you know what's best. You need to go away so Mother won't get hurt." Caril, who was wearing a duster, which is like a house coat, like a 1950s housewife, looked exhausted. Bewildered, her sister and brother-in-law left, but Bob decided to return later that day with Charles's brother, Rodney. Caril again answered the door, but warned Bob, quote, "My mom's life will be in your hands," unquote, if he tried to force his way in. That's when Bob decided to go to the police. The call was dispatched as a possible domestic dispute. 2 patrolmen arrived at the Bartlett home 5 minutes later. No one answered, but they noticed that the screen door was locked from the inside, so they knew someone must be there. In one of the bedrooms, Caril woke Charlie to warn him that the cops were outside. Finally, she opened the door, while Charlie huddled with his gun. Caril still looked sleepy, but she was now wearing a light-colored flowered kimono and her hair was messy and tangled. She told the officers that her entire family had the flu, and when they asked why Bob would get law enforcement involved, she responded, "Oh, we don't get along with him, and he don't like us very well. He probably called you just 'cause he doesn't like us." The officers took her at her word and left without requesting to see the rest of the family or the inside of the home. Although Charlie was out of earshot, Caril did not take this opportunity to ask the officers for help. Charles had been missing as well, so the next day, a Sunday, his father Guy sent Charlie's 16-year-old sister, Lavetta, over to the Bartlett residence. When she insisted that she didn't believe the influenza story, Caril mysteriously glanced back behind her inside the house and confided, "There's some guy back there with Chuck. He's got a Tommy gun. I think they're going to rob a bank." Lavetta did not believe Caril, but she reported the conversation to her father, who reasoned that since the banks were closed on Sunday, he would wait until the following day to notify police about this unsettling statement. On Monday morning, before Guy had made up his mind to do anything, Carol's maternal grandmother, named Pansy Street, what a great name, showed up at the house only to encounter a note Carol had attached to the front screen with a bobby pin, just as her mother had done years earlier to get rid of the well-meaning Nazarene. The note read, "Stay away, everybody is sick with the flu. Miss Bartlett." The word flu was misspelled as F-L-U-E. And the only Miss Bartlett in the home would have been 2-year-old Betty, since Carol went by her father's last name, Fugate. Pansy was about to knock anyway, but the door flew open before she had a chance. Carol stood just inside the door and said, "Go away, Grandma. Go home, Grandmom. Oh, Granny, go away." A feisty old woman, Pansy began screaming for her daughter to come to the door, saying, "If you can't speak so I can hear you, just come to the door where I can at least see you." But Velda didn't appear. Angry and worried, Pansy then told Carol that since she wouldn't let her inside, she was going straight to the police department to get a search warrant. This finally unnerved Charlie and Carol, so after Pansy left, they decided to bail. Leaving their breakfast uneaten on the kitchen table, they prepared their escape. Charlie wrapped a hunting knife and 2 of Marion's guns in a blanket. Carol threw some essentials and a few photos of her mother, little sister, and Charlie into a red swim bag. By the time Pansy returned with the police, they were gone, and nothing in the house seemed out of place. The following day, Bob, now frustrated as well, returned to the Bartlett house with Rodney. Finding it apparently abandoned, they began looking around. The first body they found was Velda's. She was in the outhouse, with her head stuffed down in the toilet opening. Beside her on the wooden seat, Betty's little body had been placed in a cardboard grocery box. Marion was in the chicken coop, wrapped in rags and a quilt. He and Velda had both been shot and stabbed. Betty died from a skull fracture, and Charlie would later state of the 2-year-old, "She was a little snot, in my opinion. Carol thought she was a monster. She called her about every name you could think of. You couldn't make her mind, and she got me in trouble a few times. She'd go flying into her old man or mom and say I hit her. One reason Carol didn't like her was she was a stepsister. Marion treated Betty Jean far better than he ever did Carol." When they hit the road, Charlie was driving in his black 1949 Ford sedan, with red paint standing in for a missing grille. As soon as they abandoned the Bartlett home, he remembered that one of his tires was on its last laps. He stopped at a local auto repair shop, but strangely didn't mention the tire. Instead, he asked the mechanic to work on his transmission. Carol, in a pink bandana tied under her chin, chose to stay in the car as it was raised on the hydraulic lift. She asked Charlie to get her a bottle of soda, or pop as I guess they call it in the Midwest. Charlie left without his guns, but Carol once again did not take this opportunity to ask for help from the mechanic, who noticed the 2 guns sitting in her lap. Charlie then decided to drive to the house of August Meyer, the old family friend who lived just 2 miles away. He thought they could lay low there for a while, but when he turned onto August's long, unpaved driveway, the car got stuck, thanks to the mud from recent rains. According to Charlie, Carol's reaction was, "We ought to go blast the crap out of that old man." When Charlie asked, "How come?" she shot back, "'Cause he didn't clean his driveway, that's how come." In Carol's later recollections, Charlie was the first to say he could kill August for not clearing the driveway, and she agreed in a hypothetical sense, just because she was mad about their bad luck. August Meyer was nearly 80 years old and what his neighbors referred to as a gentleman. He was soft-spoken and kind. He had never married. He handled his money well and kept his property neat. Charlie had known him nearly his entire life. Why he killed him will remain a mystery. Carol has said that Mr. Meyer came out of his house, the 2 men spoke briefly, and then Charlie raised his gun and shot him. Charlie, whose version of every story is that someone was always out to attack him for no reason, stated that he argued with August about getting stuck in his driveway, and then the older man suddenly raised a rifle and took a shot at him. Charlie raised his own shotgun and a bullet went through August's back at near point-blank range. As with Velda and Betty, Charlie decided to leave August's body in his outhouse. Caril picked up August's hat where it had been blasted off him and placed it beside the corpse. As they were leaving, August's dog began to bark at them. Charlie shot him as well. There was no need to bring the poor dog into this. The pair returned to the car, and a passing farmer helped them get it unstuck. The tire, however, was still giving Charlie trouble. Around 8 p.m., he and Caril were hitchhiking at the side of the road in the small town of Bennett, near Lincoln, each holding a gun. 17-year-old Bob Jensen and his girlfriend, 16-year-old Caril King, happened to be driving to a lover's lane near August Meyer's house in Bob's 1950 Ford. Bob and Caril were the poster children for clean teens. The two planned to marry after they finished high school. Bob was president of his class, a top student, a polio survivor, active in his family's church, and he helped out at his father's grocery store. Caril King was also a good student, attended the same church as Bob, sang in the choir, and was both a majorette and a cheerleader. Her father had died of a heart attack only 3 weeks earlier. She was fighting a cold that night, so she dressed casually to keep warm in a white sweatshirt, faded jeans, Oxford shoes, a scarf, and a heavy coat. Bob was wearing his letterman's jacket. Bob stopped to give the gun-toting hitchhikers a ride, which immediately seems like a bad idea. But this was mid-century, near rural Nebraska, and Bob recognized Charlie from the hot rodding circuit. Almost immediately, though, Charlie pressed his gun to the back of Bob's head once they were in the car and ordered him to drive to an abandoned school's storm cellar. Charlie recalled that on the way, Caril prodded him to check Bob's wallet for money. Charlie passed the billfold to her, and she removed 4 $1 bills. The wallet also contained another dollar in a hidden compartment and a photo of Caril King, who had written on it, "I wish I had a better picture for you, but I don't, so this will have to do. With all my love, Caril." From the back seat, along with rifling through Bob's belongings, Caril Fugate also pointed her gun at the couple. This, along with the $4 robbery, made her eligible for a life term in prison, according to Nebraska's felony murder rule. Once stopped, Charlie marched the young couple to the storm cellar. First, he shot Bob 6 times. After that, 2 different versions emerged about what happened next, with Charlie and Caril, predictably, later blaming each other. Caril King had 1 gunshot wound and had been stabbed several times in the vagina. During a jailhouse interview, Charlie recalled that his girlfriend afterwards called him a, quote, dirty bastard. Denying that he had raped Caril King, and in fact Charlie's DNA was not found on her body despite the sexual assault with a knife, he recalled that he tried to sleep with Caril Fugate a few hours later but was rejected. Quote, "She said I already had mine for the night. She probably walked up there and seen me down there. She could have guessed what I was doing." When asked what, in fact, he did do, he replied, "I didn't do nothing." After initially admitting he shot Caril King, he later maintained that his girlfriend had been the one to shoot her out of jealousy, while Caril Fugate maintained that Charlie shot the young woman at the cellar while she stayed in the car. The pair drove Bob's Ford back to Lincoln and spent the night in the car. They then drove around and picked out a mansion belonging to a wealthy businessman and lawyer named Lauer Ward and his wife Clara, who was vice president of the Nebraska Alumni Association. Lauer was at work, but Clara was home with their longtime housekeeper, Lillian Finsel, who was hard of hearing. Charlie held the 2 women hostage all day. Almost immediately, Clara made a fatal mistake. She told Charlie that she had a date for coffee at a friend's house later that morning, so he told her to call and say that she was ill and couldn't make it. This ensured that the friend wouldn't think anything was wrong and wouldn't try to check up on Clara. During the rest of the morning and afternoon, Charlie wrote a confession letter which he claimed Caril dictated, even though Charlie was barely literate. In any case, the letter was full of misspellings. It was written in Caril's voice, and seemed to suggest that while Charlie killed her stepfather and younger sister, she herself had shot her mother in order to keep her from attacking Charlie with a knife. They found a newspaper, the Lincoln Star, on the breakfast table. The murder of Carol's family was a top headline. They cut out the article and photos of themselves and the Bartletts, keeping them in Charlie's jacket pocket as mementos of their infamy. Then Charlie attempted to dye his hair black with shoe polish he found in a drawer. It wasn't a great job. At some point, Clara was stabbed multiple times and tied to the bed in her upstairs bedroom. Her poodle, Susie, in trying to defend her owner, was beaten with Charlie's gun until she stopped moving. So here we have the second dog attacked in this horrible story. Lillian was still downstairs and unaware of Clara's murder. Meanwhile, Charles and Carol stole $17, some binoculars, gloves, a white shirt for Charlie, and a western jacket and some of Clara's other clothing for Carol. They also stole the ward's car, a luxurious black 1956 Packard, and left Bob's stolen car at the ward residence. Around 6 p.m., Clara's husband, Lauer, arrived home. Charles shot him twice, stabbed him, then stood over his dying body and asked if he was all right. He didn't answer, Captain Obvious later recalled. As with Carole King's murder, Charlie and Caril Fugate would each blame the other for the stabbing of housekeeper Lillian, the last victim of the day. However, Carol would later admit cleaning off the knife and once again pouring perfume on the rugs and a chair in an attempt to disguise the smell of blood. Just before the killers left the house, the phone rang, and Carol inexplicably answered it. When the caller asked for Mrs. Ward, she replied, "They're all asleep," and immediately hung up. From the Ward residence, they decided to try to make their way west to Washington State, where one of Charlie's brothers lived. Heading toward the state of Wyoming that night, Charlie asked Carol for sex. In a repeat of the night before, Carol refused, saying, "You've had yours for the day." Later, Charlie supposed she thought he'd raped Clara, although autopsy findings later confirmed that no one in the Ward home had been sexually assaulted. Each day since Carol's murdered family had been discovered, panic around Lincoln had been steadily rising as more and more dead bodies turned up and the clues were all connected to Charles Starkweather. An article from the Omaha World-Herald, one of many, conveyed the mood and rhetoric. Quote, Bennett, Nebraska. Terror stalked the countryside Tuesday night. Farmhouses became armed camps, and grim-lipped men and women here, 16 miles southeast of Lincoln, burned lights far past the usual bedtime. There was only one conversation topic, a gun-crazy teenage murder suspect and his 14-year-old girlfriend. Volunteer posses were formed. No women and children walked the streets. The morning after leaving the Ward house, Charlie encountered a brand new Buick on the side of the highway in Wyoming. A 37-year-old traveling shoe salesman and father of 5, Merle Collison had pulled over to take a nap after a long drive. Charlie walked up, rapped on the window, waking Merle, and announced, "We're trading cars." When Merle said, "No thanks," Charlie raised a rifle and shot him 9 times. Yet again, he claimed he killed in self-defense. No matter who the victims were or how he instigated confrontations, it was always somebody else's fault. After he was done shooting, Charlie leaned over and asked, Man? Are you dead?" Unsurprisingly, the corpse did not answer. Just after this, a 29-year-old geologist happened to be driving along and noticed the 2 cars on the side of the road. He stopped and exited his car to offer assistance, and Charlie pulled his rifle on him. But the geologist was half a foot taller than Charlie and had at least 30 pounds on him. They wrestled with the gun. Just then, an unbelievable stroke of luck occurred. A sheriff's deputy who was patrolling the highway came across the scene. But as he began to approach the 2 men, suddenly a tiny young woman jumped out of a car and intercepted him. "Take me to the police," she cried. Hello, I'm wearing a law enforcement uniform and driving a marked car. Should be pretty obvious who I am." Just then, Charlie looked up and saw the deputy. He instantly jumped back into the Packard and took off, leaving Caril behind. The deputy put her into his car and gave chase, radioing info to his station as soon as learning from Caril that this was the fugitive, Charles Starkweather. Once other agencies intercepted Charlie and arrested him, Deputy Romer drove Caril back to Nebraska. On the way, she told him, "I seen him kill 10 people. He killed my mother, stepfather, stepsister, a boy and a girl, a farmhand, and 3 other people. I was there and seen it all. My mom and Charlie were having an argument and she slapped him. Charlie hit her back and my stepfather saw him. Charlie killed him, my mom, and stepsister. The baby was crying, so Charlie took the barrel of his gun and pushed it in her throat." As Charlie was being escorted separately, he told deputies, "Don't be rough on the girl. She didn't have anything to do with it." Caril was transported to the local jail, which has been compared to the Mayberry lockup from the Andy Griffith Show. The sheriff's wife, who was given charge of her, complained that Caril, quote, smelled and needed a bath pretty bad, but she refused to bathe or change her clothes. She spent most of her time there under sedation after some initial hysteria. Just before being extradited back to Nebraska, she intimated to the sheriff's wife that she didn't know her family was dead, which Mrs. Sheriff found bewildering. Remember, Caril and Charlie had newspaper clippings of the murders and had lived together in the Bartlett home after the deaths. On the other hand, there were those cryptic statements she'd made to her family when they'd come by the house. But most people found it hard to believe that she had no idea what had happened to her family. Caril mentioned that she didn't like her stepfather very well because he was very strict. She also commented that Lillian Finsel at the ward home had taken too long to die, and complained that Clara's clothes were too big for her, although, rubbing at a blood stain on the suede jacket of Clara's that she was wearing at that moment, she remarked, "Isn't this the prettiest jacket, though?" Upon her return to Lincoln, crowds gathered to gawk at the now famous teenage gun mall. Caril seemed to relish the fame, smiling, waving, and trying to roll down the car window at one point before the sheriff's wife stopped her. During the long ride, she made paper dolls out of Kleenex. When her car pulled up next to the car transporting Charlie to the men's jail, she glared at him, held up a paper doll to the window, and wrung its paper neck. Shortly after their return to Nebraska, Charlie requested to see Caril. She responded in a note, quote, "Chuck, I don't want to see you, because I might do something I would be sorry for later on. Caril Fugate." Charlie was adamant that his family bore no responsibility for his state of mind during the murders. He adored his mother, and of his father he said, "My dad ain't to blame for nothing I done. I just got fed up with having nothing and being nobody. Poverty gives you nothing. People who are poor take what they can get." Regarding Caril, he claimed that she had, quote, put spark and thrill into the killing. Before his trial, he noted that, quote, she was a girl who always wanted to do what I wanted to do, and that he could, quote, count on her when the going was tough. He now implicated Caril in the murders and said he previously denied her involvement because he, quote, thought she could get away with it easier. He also belatedly claimed after the trial that he'd never really loved Caril because she had mocked his death wish. Above all, as he put it, quote, "I got fed up being everybody's nobody." On the first day of his trial, Charlie appeared for court in chains that contrasted with his tan suit, red tie, black shoes, and new haircut. He'd also put on 15 pounds in jail. His attorney attempted to set up an insanity defense in his opening statement. He said in part, "Starkweather is an odd young man whose IQ has always been subnormal. At one time, a test showed him to be only a grade or 2 above an idiot." During this speech, Charlie gripped the defense table and glared at his attorney. Similarly, when his former boss recalled him as, quote, "the dumbest man who ever worked for me," Charlie's face turned red and he scowled. The insults continued into the trial, when his father, in the audience, once yelled out, "Way to go, Elmer!" when the prosecutor scored a point against the defense. To absolutely no one's surprise, the jury came back with a unanimous vote of guilty, and the judge sentenced Charlie to death in the electric chair. Charlie showed no emotion, only yawned and smiled at the sheriff. His father, true to form, commented when leaving the courthouse, "Well, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Let's all go out and get a steak." He's very perverse, but I kind of love Charlie's father for saying that. Caril at the time was the youngest woman in the history of the U.S. to stand trial for first-degree murder. Because of both her tender age and her gender, the district attorney did not ask for the death penalty, although she would stand trial as an adult. Plus, at the time, many Americans found it difficult to believe that women could even be capable of vicious, quote-unquote, manly crimes. A week before her trial began, her lead defense attorney, John MacArthur, held a press conference with Caril. She appeared in a blue sweater and skirt that her other attorney had bought her, along with bobby socks and saddle shoes, in an almost babyish look. Her hair was cut and tightly permed, which annoyed MacArthur, who felt that her ponytail would have helped her look even more innocent for the jury. She appeared hardened and angry, though, at both the world and at Charlie. She told reporters of their courtship, explaining scornfully that they mostly went to the movies on dates because Charlie couldn't dance. Quote, "He was so bow-legged. I think he's crazy." One reporter asked, "Did you ever break down and cry and beg Charlie to let you go or anything like that?" "Yes," Caril replied. "I cried all the way." Crazy or not, Charlie appeared at Caril's trial to give his version of events, flanked by 8 guards. Despite this impressive security and the fact that he was in handcuffs, Caril seemed frightened to see him, first hiding her face, and then staring wide-eyed while clutching at and twisting the fabric of her attorney's suit jacket. No one could tell whether it was an act or not. When MacArthur requested that Charlie be allowed to wear his glasses in court, Charlie resisted. Quote, "There ain't nobody in here that I want to see." He and Caril studiously avoided looking at each other while he was on the stand. Despite Pansy Street's anger on the day she tried unsuccessfully to discover what had happened to her daughter, Caril's grandmother took the witness stand in her defense. Her story had changed a bit from what she told policemen at the time she visited the Bartlett home. Now Grandma Pansy remembered that while telling her to go away, Caril put her hand over her own mouth and then discreetly pointed to a corner of the living room. Pansy now took this as a signal that Caril was being held hostage. She also recounted taking a taxi to police headquarters to report the strange goings-on at the Bartlett's house. 2 officers had been assigned to investigate at the time. Caril's attorney asked her, "Do you know whether it was Detectives Hansen and Fisher?" Pansy complained, "Well, all I know is one of them was bald-headed and he wasn't very nice." "Oh, yes, that would be Fisher." The courtroom burst into laughter at this remark. Caril testified on her own behalf, appearing on the stand in a navy blue dress with a white collar. She maintained that Charlie had told her while they were shacked up at the Bartlett residence that he would shoot anyone who managed to come through the door. She revealed that she'd broken up with Charlie, whom she referred to very formally now as Charles Starkweather, shortly before the murders occurred, because it accused her of going out with other boys and was saying, quote, "nasty things" about her. She also bizarrely complained that when police came out to check the welfare on her sister's behalf, they should have told her brother-in-law the, quote, "nasty things" she'd said about him. On the stand, she said, "I knew if the police would tell Bob what I had said, that Bob would have knowledge that something was wrong. I expected the police to go back and tell Bob what I had said about him." She also claimed that signing the note on her front door with the title Miss Bartlett should have been viewed and recognized as a clue or cry for help. During cross-examination by the deputy district attorney, Caril became so visibly angry and pursed her mouth so tightly that her lips almost disappeared entirely. She admitted to having a joint savings account with Charlie and carrying around photos of him in her purse when the pair was arrested. The prosecutor asked her, "On the way to Wyoming, did you tell Chuck Starkweather that you loved him?" Caril: "Yes, I did. I was afraid he was going to kill me. Prosecutor. And did you kiss him? Caril. No, sir. Prosecutor. You never did that? Caril. No, sir. He kissed me. Her attorney in closing arguments claimed that Caril's involvement began only with opening the door to her family home, whereupon Charlie pulled out a gun and took her hostage. MacArthur said that she tried to warn her relatives and the police, but it wasn't her fault that those messages were misunderstood or carelessly ignored. He relayed Caril's claim that she'd written a note that said simply, "Help, police, don't ignore," and put it in her jacket pocket, intending to slip it to a helpful stranger at an opportune moment, but that note never materialized. MacArthur also ridiculed the idea that Caril had any chances to escape from Charlie. Yet, as one reporter noted, Caril looked nothing like a, quote, terrified little hostage in court. She had dead eyes. The prosecutor, on rebuttal, pointed out that when officers arrived at her home, she immediately went into the bedroom and notified Charlie so that he could have his gun at the ready. She never tried to whisper a warning to the cops or make hand puppets or anything, as her grandmother claimed she'd done while she was there. The jury deliberated nearly 14 hours. They found Caril guilty on one count of murder during the course of a robbery and sentenced her to life imprisonment. Caril began to cry loudly and shouted, "No! I'd rather be executed. Someday they're going to find out they made a mistake." Caril's older sister and grandmother were both crying as well. But Pansy could be heard saying, "You've got hope and you've got life. I'm an old lady. You listen to your granny." Nevertheless, Caril's body had gone completely limp like a rag doll's, and she had to be lifted under both arms and dragged from the courtroom. Upon hearing the news from death row, Charlie told a prison guard that he felt sorry for Caril. The day before Charlie was scheduled to be executed, Caril sent a telegram directly to President Eisenhower, to everyone's amazement, including the president's, I'm sure. It read in part, "I have been denied by Governor Brooks a request to see Charles Starkweather and see if he will tell the truth in front of a minister or someone else who would be fair before he is executed. Stop. I know of no one else to turn to because all of my family I was living with he killed. Stop. I know you are very busy, but please help me in any way you can. Thank you." And just as an FYI, in case you aren't familiar with old-timey telegrams, the word "stop" in the body of the telegram is used in place of a period. The telegram as a whole was a long one, and thus must have been very expensive. But all Caril received in return was a telegram from the Secretary of Eisenhower's Special Counsel, which read in total, "The Starkweather case is entirely a state matter. The President has no jurisdiction or authority in any way to comply with your request." Following his trial, Charlie was executed extremely quickly, at midnight on June 25, 1959, after 2 stays or delays of execution. Groups of teenagers camped out near the prison, listening to a local radio station playing rock and roll songs themed around death. Bizarrely, just 2 hours before Charlie's scheduled death, the doctor assigned to sign his death certificate dropped dead of a heart attack in the warden's office. Unbelievable. Once strapped into the electric chair, Charlie's last words were in regards to the leather straps across his arms and chest. He said, "They're too loose. Can you make them a little tighter?" He never mentioned Caril at all. With no juvenile detention centers for girls, apparently, in Nebraska at the time, Caril was sent to stay in a private wing of the women's prison until her 16th birthday. She was so petite that extra small-sized uniforms had to be sewn for her. She was also initially disappointed to discover that she'd be expected to attend school again while locked up. Injury turned to insult when her prison teacher brought her children's books to read. But when she got to Little Women, Louisa May Alcott's famous 19th century novel, which I've loved since I was a little girl, it sparked an interest in literature that she'd never had before. Besides schoolwork, Caril sewed, gave prison tours, sometimes going by the name Therese, to avoid the rabid interest in her notoriety, and watch TV, although crime shows and westerns weren't allowed in the prison. During the big hair era of the 1960s, the teasing or ratting of an inmate's hair was a punishable offense. In 1970, though, inmates were allowed to wear simple jewelry, and her trial attorney's son, Jim MacArthur, now an attorney himself, brought Caril her mother's wedding band to wear. Like Charlie, Caril was sensitive about being labeled mentally ill. She never underwent psychological testing during her incarceration. 7 years after being sentenced, Caril appeared for a hearing her attorney had arranged in hopes of a retrial. For the first time, Caril alleged that she'd had to watch electric shock treatments being administered at the state hospital where she'd initially stayed while awaiting trial, since the county didn't have a juvenile holding facility. At that time, she said, she was led to believe she'd be next in line for the shock treatments if she didn't cooperate with prosecutors. Or so she claimed. When the county attorney asked her how long she'd been at the institution before witnessing the archaic treatment, she snapped at him, "I didn't count the days. I don't know." Caril did not win a new trial, and she sat in prison for another 6 years before being granted a hearing to determine if Nebraska would commute her life sentence in 1973 to a lesser amount of time. In August 1972, NBC aired a television documentary on Caril called Growing Up in Prison, and the documentary is currently on YouTube, I believe, if you would like to view it. Viewers at the time were shocked at the difference in her appearance and demeanor over the past 12 years. She wore black-framed cat eyeglasses and an enormous bouffant hairdo. Wait, I thought they didn't allow that in her prison? Maybe they changed the rules for the 70s. She was compelling and well-spoken. Some of her statements, however, didn't have the kind of impact she was hoping for. Quote, "If there was any way humanly possible that I could go back and change what happened, I would. But there is just nothing I can do. It's over with. He was a madman, and the thing of it is that people don't realize that I lost my family too." This was a rather tone-deaf statement to make. For some time, Caril had been allowed to leave the prison for a few hours each Sunday to attend services and work in the nursery at the local Church of the Nazarene. So here she's come full circle in a way. She now considered herself a born-again Christian, and around 20 church members attended her commutation hearing to either testify on her behalf or to offer Caril moral support. Another couple traveled all the way from Michigan to make a speech in favor of reducing Caril's sentence. The couple had visited Caril in prison several times after watching her documentary on TV, although they hadn't known her before that. About 32 people in total testified in support of Caril, while just 5 others, who were relatives of the dead, spoke in opposition. During an interview, Bob Jensen's mother related, "The thing that struck me most about Caril, then and still, was her very, very cold eyes, the unfeeling look that she would have. All right, you paid a few years. We'll just forget about it all. It was in the past. But you can't forget about it. Bob and Caril are as real to me as if it had happened last night." Caril ran into only a few snafus during her final commutation hearing. One was a board member's request for her to clarify what she had called her quote-unquote friendship with Charlie in a previous questionnaire. Impatiently, Caril demanded, "What exactly do you want said?" He asked, "What do you mean by, quote, attempted to terminate the friendship?" referencing Caril's relationship with Charlie on the day of her family's murder. Caril responded, "When I told him that Sunday before all this happened. When I asked him to leave and never come back. This is what set him off. I was not dating him when this actually happened." Once again, Caril was claiming that she and Charlie were no longer seeing each other at her specific request on the day that he came by the house to speak to her stepfather about marrying her. But no one else ever corroborated this version of events. Nevertheless, the Board of Pardons ruled to commute her sentence to 30 years, which made her eligible for parole just 3 years later in 1976. On June 20th, 1976, after 17 and a half years in prison, she was released. She testified that a job was waiting for her at an unnamed hospital in Michigan. This had been arranged by the couple from Michigan who had driven out to visit Caril in prison and to testify at her hearing. Caril was now 32 years old, and she told reporters, "All I want to do is settle down, get married, have a couple of kids, wash the socks, burn the toast." For the most part, Caril kept out of the public eye. She never did have children, although she eventually married at age 63. In 1983, she made a controversial appearance on a TV show called Lie Detector. Hosted by celebrity attorney F. Lee Bailey, who would later be part of O.J. Simpson's Dream Team, Caril was polygraphed on air while answering 3 general questions about the Starkweather killing spree. Number 1, did Charlie threaten to kill her family? 2, did she believe his threat? And 3, did she know her family was dead while on the road with Charlie? The official results purported that she had answered the first 2 questions truthfully. Although Caril felt vindicated, her old nemesis at the county attorney's office objected, noting that she wasn't asked more pertinent questions, such as, did she kill anyone? Did she help Charlie commit the crimes? Or did she have any chance to get away? Her last public appearance was an interview in 1989 on the TV tabloid show A Current Affair. Weeping, she related that she felt cheated out of life and that she wanted to change people's minds about her guilt. To that end, in 1990, she mailed over 200 copies of her trial transcript to Lincoln, Nebraska residents at random, hoping to convince people who probably no longer cared or weren't even alive in the 1950s that she'd always stuck to the same story. Around 2009, Caril suffered a stroke. In August 2013, she was badly injured in an auto collision at the age of 70. Her husband of 7 years, Frederick Clare, was driving on a Michigan highway when their SUV went off the road and overturned. He was 81 and died at the scene. They'd met a decade earlier at a casino. In fact, they were on their way to do some late-night gambling when the crash occurred. Caril was placed in intensive care for months. Her body was nearly crushed, and her right arm and leg were broken in several places. Caril has a close relationship with her stepsons, and they've vowed to care for her. That concludes today's blast into the bizarre past. If you've enjoyed our show, please subscribe, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Class A Felons, B Films, C Cups, or on Twitter at Class A Felons, and consider rating us with 5 stars. Source information and further reading is listed on our website at classafelons.wordpress.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back soon with another story told with vintage flair and big hair.